key to igniting your leadership passion and excelling in your leadership abilities starts with leading yourself well first. Leading myself well first, that sounds a little bit maybe even selfish. You mean I need to focus on myself and develop myself before I go lead other people? I maybe even need to have a bit of a selfish aspect to my leadership? Yes, it might feel a little bit selfish, but it's not self-serving. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How do I lead myself well without becoming self-serving? How do I lead myself well so I can ignite my leadership passion and inspire my team? Leadership, just as there's many different, we're all unique individuals, leadership comes in many different shapes and sizes, right? And we see great examples of leadership from the private sector, the public sector, right? We see great leadership and we talk about great leadership in the sports realm, right? And then we have great stories of leadership and service and sacrifice for the men and women who've committed to serving our country in the military. And we're going to talk about those as examples over the next several minutes. In order to do bigger and better things, to grow the what we do, we first need to focus on the who we are. And we need to grow the who we are, and that starts with leading ourselves well first. Because as leaders, if we only focus on the what we do, and we go after the bigger prizes and the bigger opportunities, and we first don't focus on the who we are, well then we become those leaders who just seek to grab the spotlight. Take a picture of ourselves and say, look at what I did, versus rather, look at who I've become. We live in a world with a lot of changes, a fast-paced world, a lot of changes, a lot of uncertainty. But there is one thing that is certain. The things that have made great leaders, there are some common themes, and it doesn't matter whether you were leading in 1850, 1950, or 2018. Think about how we talk about this in the sports world. Who was the greatest of all time? Who was the greatest point guard in basketball of all time? Who was the greatest quarterback in the NFL of all time? Right? And sometimes we'll talk about points scored and games won or touchdown passes thrown, right? But that conversation always seems to culminate and always seems to end around this one point. Which one of these players, when the game was on the line, when the team needed them most, said, give me the ball, I'll carry the ball, I'll take that final shot, I'll cross the end zone. And if they weren't the individual to take the final shot or to cross the end zone, they were definitely willing to say, give me the ball, and in this moment of uncertainty, I'll get it to our teammate who will. And that's who we say is the greatest of all time. And that's where they admire them. Because in those moments of uncertainty, in those moments when the game was on the line, they were willing to take the risk. The risk of leading themselves well, of leading their teams well, and the risk of leadership. I often hear leadership talked about in several ways. There's the square jaw, victory or death, never let people see us sweat, never admit our mistakes kind of leaders. And then there are the leaders who, it's all about others and selfless and servant leadership. And sometimes I think this sets up a false choice for us for leadership. It becomes an either-or conversation. What I'm here to suggest to you today and propose to you today, you know what? They're simultaneously both right at the same time. Leading ourselves well so that we can lead and influence others to greater and bigger and better things means we need to learn how to be selfish without being self-serving, without incorporating self-interest. What does that sound like? What does that feel like? What does that look like? I'd like to share a couple things with you, right? We need to like who I see, right? We need to like that person we see in the mirror. Be our biggest champion, maybe even idolize ourselves a little bit. We need to fine-tune those voices in our head, those people whose opinions matter to us. And you know what? We need to determine our own finish lines throughout our lives. Because we only face one finish line. This life we've been blessed with, there's only one finish line that we don't determine, and that's at the end of our lives. Every other finish line we set for ourselves, we determine. Are those finish lines that we set for our lives before that final finish line, before we reach the great beyond, are those finish lines giving us a chance to be the best leader and influencer of others that we can be? So let's dive in. Liking who I see, being my biggest champion, idolizing myself. That leader in the mirror that you see is counting on you. Be your biggest champion. Create moments where you can be self-confident and you can share that self-confidence and inspire others, because if we don't have self-confidence, how can we inspire confidence in others? Something that leaders must do. If we won't become our biggest champion, who will? Right? And at the same time that we're being our biggest champion and idolizing ourselves, is it also possible that we can be our most honest critic? I think we can, right? Because if we can't be our biggest champion at the same time, be one of our most honest critics, do we become our biggest lie? Fine-tuning the voices in our head. You know, the people that we listen to, the people whose opinions matter to us, affect our motives, our attitudes, our values throughout the day, right? Impact our mood. We seek out their opinion. They matter to us. We want their affirmation, right? We seek their approval. Those people are not in our lives by accident. We put them there. We made a conscious choice to have them in our inner circle. What is that choice? Say to the rest of the world about us, right? And people who are leading themselves well, who are focusing on self, they make very conscious choices about those people in their inner circle. You know, for every great thing we've accomplished in our lives, for every great achievement we had, our friends and our closest family, they were there cheering us on. For every biggest regret we've had in our lives, they were there cheering us on. You know, I think every now and again we need to take an inventory of the voices in our head. And if we were to run a 5K race, can we imagine who are the people at the end of that race that are cheering us on, helping us reach our goal, carrying across that finish line? And who are the voices that are at that start line, stopping us from even getting started? Saying, well, this is stupid, why are you doing this? The voices that we allow in our heads, the people in our inner circle, they will influence our talent and take it up or down one way or the other. Nothing is sure. Make great choices about the voices that we listen to and that influence our day-to-day, our attitudes, our motives, and our values. You know, the final thing we need to do is we need to make our own finish line, right? We face one final ultimate finish line at the end of our lives, but every one of those other finish lines are finish lines that we determine for ourselves. And you know, one of the finish lines that I often hear us talk about in our lives is, I went the extra mile for him or her. But what does that really mean? Isn't that an artificial finish line? I went the extra mile. So where does mile one end and mile two begin? At what point is it okay for me to say, if I'm leading myself while I'm trying to influence and lead others, right, to expand their talents, at what point is it okay for me to say, well, I've given this person enough. I'm going to stop today. And tomorrow, maybe that person I interact with, I'll give them that extra mile. Great leaders don't determine their success in feet or miles traveled or second in hours on a clock. They determine that success by the influence they create and the things that they inspire others to do. How they are able to draw the team into me, say, give me the ball, and then inspire that team to go do great other things. You know, there's two great examples of determining your own finish line, not going the extra mile, and it comes from the great men and women that I've had the chance to interact with in the military. The first one's a very personal story. One of my son, he graduated from the United States Marine Corps boot camp earlier this year. And these two stories might be a great example of the beginning and at the end, right? Of careers, of lives. And when he was graduating from boot camp, he was interviewed by a reporter. This reporter asked him, Zach, as you were going through the trials and tribulations of boot camp, and one of the greatest trials and tribulations is an endurance test known as the Crucible, what kept you going? What motivated you? And he said, I heard a little piece of advice that my dad used to give me. He said, I didn't like it very much growing up in middle school and high school. He said, it goes in one ear and out the other. He said, but in that moment, I heard that voice in my head. I heard my dad saying, you can't get to the top if you're not willing to be over the top. You can't get to the top if you're not willing to be over the top. Be over the top. Be your biggest champion. Idolize yourself. Be over the top. Be passionate about your support for others and their goals and their ambitions, but be over the top. Collectively, strive for excellence, but do not achieve mediocrity. Be over the top. You know, the second story I would share with you comes from a neighbor of mine who I knew when I was growing up. I used to deliver newspapers, and this neighbor's name was Tony, and he wore the same baseball cap his entire life. His baseball cap said 5370 Composite Unit, World War II. And fast forward several years, my wife and I bought a house. Tony was our neighbor. Great story, kind of person you like to have as a neighbor. He used to hire my son to cut his grass. And we didn't realize it, but towards the end of Tony's life, as he was nearing that finish line, right, the one we don't get to all determine, he called us over one day, and he had out pictures and memories and scrapbooks of service, of sacrifice, of suffering from his time in World War II. The 5370 Composite Unit. was known as Merrill's Marauders. Every one of those members of that unit, including Tony, my neighbor, earned a Bronze Star. Towards the end of the conversation, I said, Tony, you're not getting any younger. What do you need my generation? What would you like my son's generation to share about what you've talked to us today? And he said, here's the thing. He said, here's the thing which keeps me up at night at 3 o'clock in the morning. He said, I asked myself that question. What more could I have done? So this man, with all the service and sacrifice, right, at the end of his life, he still hadn't reached that finish line. He hadn't determined where the finish line of his influence, of his leadership, of his being better today than he was yesterday. He still hadn't determined that. He couldn't determine where mile 1 ended and mile 2 began. If that doesn't inspire us, I don't know what can. Lead yourself well first. Be selfish without being self-serving. Like who you see when you look in the mirror. Like that leader you see. Be your biggest champion. Idolize yourself. Fine-tune the voices in your head and determine your own finish lines. Right up until that moment that you face that final finish line in your life. And you will be able to lead other people, influence other people, and write the story of a leadership story worth telling. Thank you very much.